Welsh Rugby Union have announced they will be cutting their professional teams down to two in a mammoth bit of news which has sent shockwaves around Wales. I'm Adam Gaston, welcome back to the Rock and Roll Show. I'm here with Scarlets and Wales fan Tomos Oakley, who's joining us on the show today. Welcome Thomas, how's it going?
Yeah, thanks for having me, bud. I suppose generally in myself doing really well, to be honest. The news, as you say, sent shockwaves through the country over the last sort of 24 hours that we'd be going down to two pro teams.
Yeah, it is absolutely massive bit of news after what has been a huge couple of weeks in Welsh Rugby, really a huge couple of months. We'll just go through the sort of the itinerary on the show. Obviously we'll speak about the new Wales proposals, the restructuring of the pro sides. We'll also speak about the sort of the smaller matter of what it seems now of the summer series that was in Japan. Sort of Jack Morgan and Thomas Williams in the Lions series and autumn series coming up for Wales and Louis Rees-Zammits going to Bristol. Basically just all things Wales, Thomas. But we must start into what is a huge bit of news, something that's sort of been sort of festering under the surface for a while, sort of around the rumour mill. Just to go through what we have coming out here today, it was just this afternoon that it had been announced that Welsh Rugby Union are proposing cutting down to two professional teams with a men and women's team in each organisation. And a couple of details on this, there could be 50 players in each men's squad with a budget of £7.8 million in each, with women's squads of 40 players. Two squads would feature predominantly Welsh qualified players with a sort of a reassessment on non-Welsh qualified players playing for the regions. The WRU would fund two men's and women's teams operated under licenses, with the union giving owners and investors responsibility for all commercial operations. In terms of the phases of the proposal, phase one would involve the move of two sides, men's and women's, to two different sites, with a transition to contracting players and staff to central national academies. And then phase two of the plan would involve clubs moving to training at one site, which will be known as the national campus. The campus would be home then to 400 people, including men's and women's staff, with professional and club staff at the national academies and men and women's academies to be centralised. So this is basically the proposal that is on the table, which is preferred by the WRU. There's a number of others that are on the table here as well, but this is the one that is preferred. This is the one that the WRU believe is the best way forward for the Welsh rugby game. The other options would be 4 clubs with unequal funding, 3 clubs with equal funding, 3 clubs with unequal funding, and 2 clubs with equal funding. So there's a couple of different proposals on the table, and this is something that they're going to consider over the coming months before they make their decision in sort of communication with the various different stakeholders that are involved. But as a Welsh rugby fan, at the ripe old age of I think it's 22, Thomas, isn't it? How does this bit of news sort of make you feel as a Welsh rugby fan?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned my age there because there's a whole generation of us now really that will only ever remember regionalism the way it is. Of course, there'll be an older generation who can remember pre-2003, before we had 5 and then 4 professional teams in Wales, that were going to compete in Europe. So yeah, it's gonna be the first real seismic shift in the structure of the professional game here that many of us will have ever seen, as you say, at least a couple of generations. So yeah, I think the first one is shock. It's a little bit of a more extreme approach that the WRU have taken than many of us here thought they would have gone with. A lot of people did expect them to go down to 3, with the suggestion of a merger between the Ospreys and the Scarlets. 2 reasons for that being A, that they were the 2 teams that didn't sign the initial sort of One Wales agreement that the WRU had put forward, which was its 4 professional teams with equal funding proposal. And the second being that a merger between those two had in fact already been rumoured a few years ago and came a lot closer than a lot of people might have expected in the first place. So I think that's what a lot of people were expecting to happen or be announced. But 2 professional teams, really, I think it'll be interesting to see the second one that the cut is. But really, I think a lot of people are thinking, okay, that's a bit drastic, even if so many have been calling for a major overhaul of the system here.
Yeah, well, it's interesting to hear you say that in terms of the reaction around Wales and the complicity, or well, maybe not non-complicity, I suppose, with the Ospreys and Scarlets, with sort of professional agreements with the WRU. Just to bring it back to a couple of different quotes that are coming out from the WRU, Chief Executive Abby Tierney has sort of played a nod to how emotional the game of rugby is in Wales, and how she understands that this is going to be a hard moment for Welsh rugby fans, but something radical had to happen to put the game into a better place. Director of Rugby Dave Redden has sort of stressed the point of investing in elite rugby and excellence, and sort of having two teams where they can structure financially and infrastructure to compete at the top level, as well as sort of invest funds into the wider game in Wales. And on the other side of that, we've had sort of rugby players like Joe Hawkins, current Welsh rugby players like Joe Hawkins, coming out and sort of calling the move quite short-sighted. Where on this sort of spectrum of opinion would you place yourself, Tom?
Yeah, there are so many questions that are left unanswered about this, aren't there, at the moment? And I'm sure we'll get a few more answers in good time. Whether they're good answers or not, I don't know. From the WRU, we'll have to wait and see. But I suppose I get the Joe Hawkins sense of things as well, because I talk about Welsh fans having grown up, people our age really, only ever known regionalism. Players are in the same boat. They've grown up only ever aspiring to play for these teams. So short-sighted on that part. Perhaps that's the wrong word, but I entirely get what he means in the sense of affinity. And I mean, where are the next crop of players wanting to come from, playing for two teams that they've never really heard of? So I do get him saying, in a sense,
That's the point. That is the point he made. He was
yeah,
making that
yeah,
point
I do
of,
understand him getting the sense of
yeah.
where the appeal is going to come from. That's a really good question to ask on his part. But short-sighted, it could be. It could be. The jury's out for me on that one, whether it's short-sighted or whether WRU are actually looking towards some sort of future on this, because I do think it will make the professional teams in Wales more competitive, albeit less of them. Whether it's the best thing for professional rugby as a whole, and we'll get into that in a bit later on, I think that's a slightly different debate to be had. But if you're looking at wanting two teams that are more competitive than the current four there currently are, then I think that probably will happen. Whether it's the answer to all our problems is another question.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of strands to sort of pick out here from that question of whether it will make, and that's where I guess where you would start the debate. Is the very top level of the game. You put aside probably the Welsh international. I mean, we probably could go into that as a wider debate at the end. But in terms of the club size sides at the very top of this, you would say putting more investment into those sides and making less of them, where you can you can sort of put more money into them. 7.8 million has been touted, which would be sort of a couple of million increase on what the sides normally, what the sides currently get. You have that, and Joe Hawkins indeed agreed that that would probably help the sides compete at a higher level, I suppose, with more funding. But I think it is the question as well of the sort of the legacy of it in the game, where you speak about the fans and them having the passion to go to games. That's another question. We don't know whether it's going to be those top sides are going to be new sides, or whether they're going to be the current sides but just less. Hasn't been clarified as of yet. Well, I'm sure we'll get more information in the coming weeks, coming days and weeks and months on that. But I think, yeah, in terms of the top level, Tom, do you think it would be sustainable top level competition for those Welsh sides, or do you think it would be sort of, oh well, we'll get a couple of good seasons, and then you might see the longer term effects down the line where it doesn't really sustain itself?
I think it literally all depends on how good those squads are. More money means you're going to be able to spend more on them, which, at the moment, that's the thing, isn't it? It's all in theory they should be good or they should be better, based on the fact they will have more money, based on the fact that the WRU will eventually centralize their training hub, which should be of a better quality than where the teams are training now. although training together at the same, well, not necessarily together, but using the same base for training at the same time is going to be a pretty alien concept for rival teams in any professional sport. So you can look at that as pioneering, or some people call it downright stupid. So that's going to be interesting in itself. But yeah, so I think if it can be sustainable, you can sustain two teams at that level, absolutely. Whether they'll be competitive at the top level of the sport season in, season out, I'm not so certain. Can they fare better than the current four? Yes, as well, But the Scarlets have still got Champions Cup on the current budget. And let's not forget that most people would agree, I think, that the state of non-test level, well, test level as well, professional rugby in Wales full stop, is in dire straits at the moment. So perhaps they're just punching above their weight. Perhaps they're just an anomaly. Perhaps I'm just biased. I don't know. But it certainly boils down to a point where, in theory, what the WRU are saying about these teams being more competitive should be true. And certainly sustaining them financially should be easier on a larger budget. But we all know that life comes at you quickly. I think a lot of what's happened with regional rugby in Wales can be put down to COVID and increased costs. And with that, the appetite for regional rugby hasn't really grown. We've seen Judgment Day is a thing of the past now. The WRU have said it's not going to happen again. And I highly doubt it's going to happen again now with going down to two teams. It's just not an event, really, is it? It's a match. So, yeah, there's a lot to be lost, I think, with losing two teams. More to be gained competitively, yeah, but I'll say
This is
I don't
another
really.
caveat.
It's one of those where you have to get your crystal ball out, really, in terms of whether long-term success can be sustained.
Well, this is another caveat to throw into the mix. You say top level. You say investment into these teams is going to be more. But another thing that sort of throws a bit of it contradicts this point. Well, and sort of seemingly contradicts this point is that some of the proposals sort of has also suggested that we're gonna have a rethink about how many non-Welsh qualified players are going to be playing for these regions as well, which would seem to sort of suggest that they're going to just pump loads of money into the sort of the youth systems of these teams and sort of create all homegrown players and sort of have, I guess, probably more of like what you would say, more like an Irish setup, I suppose, maybe where there's a lot
Yeah,
of
yeah. Well,
instead of a
I was.
lot of homegrown. But that sort of seemed obviously it's worked for Leinster, but Leinster have also, and many other sides have also benefited from bringing players in from the outside to add that bit of class and professional nous and all that sort of stuff. So do you think that point of rethinking the non-Welsh qualified players contradicts the top level aim of these proposals?
Yeah, again, I can see where you're coming from with that, but let's not forget the URC is essentially 50% international window. These teams have only got their best international players for, well, Northern Hemisphere players at least anyway, for half of the season, give or take. So I think it is absolutely vital to invest in international players coming in to bolster these squads and give them the strength in depth that they so desperately need. I don't think that's necessarily a controversial point to make on the WRU sense. Where I think the controversial sense is that that means ultimately less Welsh players playing in Wales. You can still only have 15 players on a rugby pitch. So I think you're going to have more players plying their trade outside of Wales. That's essentially why Louis Rees-Zammits, I think, hasn't ended up at a Welsh region. Otherwise, I'm sure they'd have tried to sign him for Cardiff if they knew Cardiff was still going to be a thing.
Well, that's. Would you say they're trying to compensate? Maybe by as they're going to have to cut the amount of professional players playing in Wales, or maybe it's trying to have to compensate by
Um,
reassessing how many
Potentially.
Welsh are playing for them, how many they're going to bring in from the outside.
Yeah, potentially. I mean, the 60 cap rule isn't what it used to be. It's only a 25 cap rule now. It's still a really young squad as well, though. So to remove another two teams and potentially have a smaller player pool for Steve Tandy to pick from for his autumn series and looking into the future, not a million miles away from the World Cup now either. Sort of mid-cycle on that one. It's going to be, that perhaps that's where the short-sightedness comes from, actually, more so than the affinity side of things that Joe Hawkins was talking about. But yeah, if you're going to look at it that way and take it for a fact that the WRU are narrowing the player pool, two less teams for academy products to get into, which as well kind of contradicts what they're saying in we're going to invest more in the youth side of the game, but they've also got two less professional sides to break into. So it's almost we're going to develop these players and then they're going to jump ship to the Gallagher Premiership, to the top 14. Some of the older boys could head over to Japan. So yeah, it's where are these players going to go? The WRU clearly can't afford to pay them. I know we've seen squad sizes of 40 spoken about in the women's game. I'm not sure if it would be a similar size for the men's game.
Yeah,
Um,
well, I think it said maybe 50 for the men's.
50 for the men's game. Well, you can only have 15 of those on a pitch at any given time. I can guarantee a few of those 50 would end up playing in Super Rugby Cymru, which is semi-professional rugby, at the likes of Swansea, Cardiff RFC, Bridgend. So it's, yeah, you could talk about investing in game time, but when these players sort of get to a point where they should be in a starting 15 every weekend, what's going to happen?
Yeah, well, it's going to be a lot of it's going to be a lot of players sort of sat out and
Yeah,
not
yeah, exactly.
at the
Exactly.
full.
And then you've got less of Wales's top players playing in Wales. How big of an issue that is an entirely different debate. Whether you're a person who thinks all of Wales's best players should be playing in Wales to help keep the regions competitive, or whether you think, I suppose that's what this whole debate is really, or whether you think cutting down to two and actually just having more money and being able to attract the best players, whatever nationality they are, will make teams more competitive, and whether that's the best thing for Welsh rugby. I suppose that's what the real debate is here. Um, but yeah, from a player perspective, um, I actually think it presents less opportunity, even if they're going to invest to break into a first team, put it that way, even if they're going to invest heavily, more so in youth infrastructure.
Something that sort of cropped up for me in this debate is Scotland. Scotland rugby have always, or sort of had professional era two sides. They've had Edinburgh and Glasgow. Do you think when you look at the success of Scottish rugby in recent years, yes, they haven't won a Six Nations. Do you think on the other side of the argument where you speak about the less opportunities to play, Wales can maybe take something that Scotland have learned from having only two professional sides themselves and sort of learn for themselves and how to better those club and national sides? Because I mean, you look at Edinburgh and Glasgow and they're doing pretty well. And they have done for a number of years now.
Well, if there's anybody who can really bring anything from that environment, it's Steve Tandy. So suddenly the pieces perhaps are coming together for the WRU and where their thought processes have been in other relatively recent decisions made as well. But I think you've got two slightly contrasting stories in Glasgow and Edinburgh. Glasgow have won the URC/Pro 12/Pro 14, a few times now, been really successful. Got the likes of Van der Merwe. Gregor Townsend made the step from there up to the head coach of the national team. Whereas you've got Edinburgh, Richard Cockrell came in and really turned them around. But yeah, you could probably learn something from Glasgow. They certainly had the international influence. With the likes of DTH, eventually making the Scotland squad. So, Edinburgh, I mean, they've been all right, haven't they? They've made European competition now and again. So, um, it's a structure, I suppose, that Welsh rugby will have to learn from. But I think the split between those two is a little bit more clear cut than what we've got here.
Do you think just because the fact that it's always been that way, and I suppose in Scotland, football's probably more the national sport, that it doesn't work the same way almost as what I'm hearing. Sort of what the gut tells me is Wales's national sport is rugby. Scotland's is probably majority football. Rugby's obviously a big sport as well, but having less teams to support also. Do you think the sort of national identity plays a factor in that as well? The sort of nuance between the
Oh
two?
yeah. I think it certainly does. I think the rivalry between two big cities plays a part as well, in those two teams. But if you're looking at the Scottish national team, for instance, I think they've improved down to a better flow of talent into their ranks. Not necessarily just from Scottish teams, but from English teams, Welsh teams as well. Let's not forget John Barclay was a part of that Pro 14 winning team at the Scarlets
I'm
before he
surprised it's
retired.
taken you 24 minutes to mention the Scarlet.
Yeah, well, I mean, you had to drop it in somewhere, didn't you? I was trying to find the right moment, but yeah,
It's in
and
times
and
of
that was a
darkness you
product
probably
of
bring up
Welsh rugby,
these.
really.
Yeah,
You can
you've
look
got
at other
time.
products of Welsh rugby that have done well. Ty Burn, you were about to mention, I think,
That's it. Yeah,
who broke into that Island squad when he was at the Scarlets. Simon Easterby as well. If you want to look from a coaching perspective, is a Llanelli man. Ended up head coach of Ireland in the Six Nations. So I think talent can come from all over, which is why I'm sort of I can understand the WRU's point about investing in talent from further seas and rethinking the sort of Welsh only sort of come on, let's play the lad from round the corner, even if he's not the best, just to develop the local talent sort of perspective. Because I think that's sort of an outdated view as well. But the creation of opportunities is what needs to be there for me. Glasgow and Edinburgh have done that quite well. Um, I feel they haven't overloaded their teams, but that's, I think, more of a coaching or a rugby decision as opposed to a financial decision.
yeah. Well, you speak about the outside influence, and that has been huge for Scotland. But also speaking about the development of the game sort of behind. You mentioned the Welsh Rugby Premiership, obviously, and the sort of wider community game. As this has been sort of a big thing that has been touted as well, is the fact that cutting the regions down to two would free up more money to invest in the sort of strategically invest in the wider game of the of Welsh Rugby. How this strategy is going to be carried out, it remains to be seen. But what do you make of that sort of argument for the proposal?
Yeah, it's an interesting argument the WRU make in the sense that um, everywhere else in Wales also needs money, which I do sympathise with. But Super Rugby Cymru, we finally got our answer with last season. It was the first season of that competition, so that was a new 10-team um, sort of go-between league, rather, if you want, between community rugby and the professional game here in Wales. And there were two teams that, three teams really, that missed out on that. I say missed out. Neath missed out on it. They applied. Pontypridd and Merthyr decided they didn't want to apply for it, due to financial reasons. So that's a 10-team league of teams that were in the old Indigo Group Premiership, as it were, or the Welsh Premiership before that. But that is designed to essentially be a feeder into the professional game, and you're supposed to have teams there feeding for professional teams. So in the Gwent region, feeding the Dragons, you've got the likes of Pontypool, Ebbw and Newport. In the Ospreys region, you have Swansea and Bridgend. In the Cardiff region, you've got Cardiff RFC. The other two big clubs, Pontypridd and Merthyr in that region, as I say, they didn't want to be involved. And then you've got RGC, which is tenuous because they're North Wales as well. But RGC, Carmarthen, and Llandovery are supposed to be feeding the Scarlets. So that's actually quite evenly divided up. Now that structure sort of throws out the window as well with this change. So the finances there, I think, not only need to be more, inevitably, because you only have because you're essentially saving money on what you would have been spending on professional rugby. Let's not forget, WRU are doing this to save money, not actually invest more money into the professional game. I think that's a big point that they would try to have you believe differently on, which is just not the case, because I think they're still going to be spending more or less £10 million less than they were on professional rugby. So yeah, I think if you're going to spend more money on Super Rugby Cymru, that would then need to be reallocated in a sense of what goes to East versus West. If we're going to two teams, that's the obvious split for me. And then how those teams are used to develop talent, as you say, 50 players per team for the men's team. That's a hell of a lot. Which players go to which team? How are they funded? Are their wages paid through this increased money? Because let's face it, the clubs are financially constrained themselves. So those are the questions that are still left to be answered. I really feel like the WRU have just come out and said, look, We've got 2 teams. This is our idea. It's going to be amazing. And what really needs to be answered now is specific details of how and where this money is going to be targeted. Hello, you're back.
Well, anyway, yeah, well, it is interesting that sort of I guess you speak about the details. There's so much like unanswered questions. There's so much what is going to happen here, what's going on. It's up in the air and will be up in the air for these professional sides, for these, as you say, the semi-professional sides as well. How is that going to structure at
I
each
mean,
level?
we say that. We haven't really even spoken about which teams are going to be or should be the ones to go, or
Well, that's the question.
how 4 should go into 2.
Mhm. So that hasn't been clarified in terms of they haven't clarified whether it's going to be new sides, or whether it's going to be existing sides. You would imagine it would be easier if they just did existing sides. You would think, but you don't know that. But what would be what would you think would be the best sort of sides to keep in this scenario, or what do you think would be the best way to go?
I don't think the East is going to be as much as a problem as the West for the WRU. Let's not forget the WRU now own Cardiff after they went into administration. They did own the Dragons at one point as well. They've gone back into private ownership, but they actually signed up to the WRU's principal agreement of the One Wales approach, which all 4 teams were supposed to sign, but didn't. So I think those parties could get along quite amicably. You could look at a merger between those two, which I think would only end in one way, and that would be the Dragons being absorbed by Cardiff. Because let's face it, you're not really going to want to move professional rugby out of the capital city uh, at any level, let alone non-test level. So for the West, you have 2 teams that have recently made really good business cases publicly to stay in business. The Ospreys have had planning permission for their revamp of St Helens approved, and historic ground that we've both been to and watched rugby there. I'm sure you'll agree it's a fantastic night out. Um, and you've got the Scarlets, who have somehow got David Moffat back involved with Welsh Rugby, and an American firm taking a 55% stake in the business, as well as an extension on their loan of Parker Scarlets from Carmarthenshire County Council, who paid for the stadium to be built in the first place. So um, these guys are 2 clubs at the moment that are very much going to say, well, look, we're not only setting ourselves up, but we're looking towards the future. We've got big changes coming ahead that we think are going to put us on a better footing to make more money, to attract better players, and to bring a real good, feel-good atmosphere back to both of these clubs. So with the momentum that those 2 hope to carry through from their work in the off-season, I think whichever one of those, I suppose either one of those could cease to exist in the event of a merger, but whichever one of those ceases to exist completely in the sense of a ground and very little current/historical presence, whichever way you look at that, is going to feel a real kick in the teeth.
That's absolutely that's such an interesting aspect of the debate, really, because we've had so much information coming out recently about, as you say, about Ospreys and Scarlets, and how that's sort of thought with that information coming out that's Welsh Rugby must be fine. They've got these new developments which are going to increase the sort of the strength of these sides, and then this sort of bombshell's just been dropped in there, and now you're sort of reevaluating how that may look. That might actually look as, this has happened for a case of they're trying to stay in, and they're going to make this case by showing their business acumen, by showing that they are too valuable an asset to dispense of. I think it's really interesting as well in terms of you speak about the heritage and the history. I think if you look at the 4 sides, Cardiff, I think, is probably the one that is indispensable in terms of like a location. You have to have that Welsh rugby side in the capital city. Just it's unthinkable to think of Welsh rugby without them. As well as their sort of successes winning the Challenge Cup twice and being decent in the URC for a number of years. the Scarlets winning the URC, well, what would have been the Pro 14, but it's the URC 2017, and their successes in getting the Champions Cup recently, and Ospreys obviously winning their fair share of Celtic leagues and Pro 14s and URC's league campaigns, successful league campaigns, and all the sort of great players they've had. So it's sort of interesting. It's all sort of seen like the Dragons may be that sort of that one that's people are maybe looking more towards. But then it's just fascinating to
Yeah,
see
the,
that.
the Dragons the Dragons have taken a really interesting approach because it's different from the Scarlets and the Ospreys, really different in the sense that they've actually played to the tune of the WRU and essentially said, yeah, sure, we'll sign the contract as long as you can guarantee that this will secure our future. And the WRU said, and the WRU said, yeah, absolutely, this secures your future. It's fine, it's dependent on the other four teams signing it. The As I said, Cardiff Rugby are owned by the WRU, so there's not such issues there. So the Dragons could well feel like they've been misled if they cease to exist altogether. So I wouldn't expect them to take this line down, despite the fact, as I said already, their relationship with the WRU seems to be slightly more amicable than that of the Ospreys and the Scarlets at the moment. So yes, you can look to them in the sense that they're the least competitive of the bunch. With all respect to them, they're a good team, well-structured business, and have done well to get back into private ownership. But they don't deliver on the pitch. Bottom of the URC. Again, don't really have a major trophy to add to their name, unlike the Ospreys, unlike the Scarlets, unlike Cardiff. So you can see where they're coming from in terms of people looking to them to see them to be the team to go. And a few years ago, they would have been the obvious choice. But now they're the only ones who actually, off of their own back, have signed up to the WRU's One Wales approach. Now, given that they were the only team to sign up to that, is it really right, I suppose, in a moral sense or a business, in a real sense, really, that they should be the team to suffer, i.e., be axed, as a result of the inaction of the Scarlets and the Ospreys not signing on?
Well, that's the question, whether they go for that moral approach you say of, well, you've backed us, so we'll back you, or you're going to go for that I guess, the more history, the more prestige, probably the more valuable asset, really, when you consider all those factors. If I was to press you for say this proposal does go through, we'll have the consultation period now, which begins on the 1st of September, before recommendations can be sent in mid-October to the WRU board to make a final decision. So we're looking at sort of a couple of months process here, but to come back, if I was to press you for two sides here that are going to remain as part of Welsh Rugby and as a professional side, what would those two be?
Scarlets and Cardiff.
I was thinking the same, to be fair. I was thinking the
Yeah,
exact.
I think, put it this way, as they are in terms of their location, Snethley and Cardiff. Um, I would propose an East versus West split and a merger as opposed to getting rid of two teams, a merger of four into two, with that East versus West split. It's not as if Rodney Parade is going to lay dormant, let's face it, because Newport County are using it every other week. And, as much as I think the ground is maintained mostly by the Dragons, I think it may still be owned by the WRU as well. I'll have to check on that. But, that would still be used. The redevelopment of St. Helens, although approved, hasn't actually started yet. And, ground hasn't broken. The Ospreys are out of the Swansea.com stadium as it stands, and they've only got the Brewery Field next season for 1 year. So it would be pretty much a no-brainer there that I think they would move into Parker Scarlets, if a merger was to happen out west. So that would be the easiest option under the current proposals, whether you think they're right or wrong.
What would that look like, though, Tom? If you had Joe Hawkins coming out and saying sort of the passion and the loyalty of the fans, you probably had a couple of Ospreys and Scarlets fans sort of seen coming through and saying we
Yeah,
don't want more. How would that take shape, do you think?
I think the WRU or Abby Tierney kind of alluded to it in her statement. Nobody's really going to be that impressed with it. Nobody's going to be pleased with it. The WRU seem to think this is the solution to where they are financially, and this is how they're going to at least go some way to balance the books. Let's not forget that the current four professional teams are still also saddled with a £20 million bank loan taken out by the WRU. over the course of to have kept them afloat over the course of COVID, each having to pay back £5 million each. So how that debt is restructured is another thing that comes into it as well between these businesses of 4 that would now become 2. Do the 2 new teams assume the debt that would double due to the halving of the teams? That's another question that's left unanswered as well. Or would the WRU assume that and pay it off with the money that they're so going to save on the reduced spending on the professional game? That's where more unanswered questions come in. But as in answer to the question, what it would look like, are we going to be looking at black and red kits for an Osprey Scarlets merger, or blue and amber kits for a Cardiff Dragons merger? I really don't know. As I say, it would have been a lot easier, I feel, a more palatable decision to go down to 3. But it's not going to be popular with those sets of fans. The clubs themselves are going to be involved with how this looks, so they are going to have some input. I know the Ospreys came out with a statement today and said that they were very pleased that the WRU is keen to work with the current clubs on the future of Welsh rugby. Although I think the current clubs are almost going to be backed into a corner now of saying, of looking towards the future of 2 teams, as opposed to making a case to the WRU and saying, well, we don't want this to happen, because I don't think they're going to be able to do that, and the WRU are going to be quite steadfast in their approach. It's tricky whether for example, would the Scarlets just absorb the Ospreys? I really don't know. That's not going to be a popular opinion, but are they going to be called the Scarlets Ospreys? No, they're not. So are we looking at new names for teams? Quite
Well, I think
possibly, while maintaining the official history of the clubs they had before. That could potentially be an option. It's been done before. Let's not forget that both Scarlets and Cardiff actually assumed the official history of the clubs that were founded in the 1800s. You know, and in a sense, the Scarlets actually did it much earlier than Cardiff. But the Scarlets assumed the official history of Llanelli with a new Llanelli RFC, if you like, being established in 2003. So it was actually a new semi-pro side in 2023, not a new professional side, even though it practically was that, if you get what I mean. On paper, it wouldn't have been that. So
yeah.
that could be something that's looked at in terms of assuming the history of 2 teams and these teams taking on the official histories of each other. And that would be a really sort of almost unheard of approach to merging teams in any professional sport, really, where the greatest of rivals come together and join forces and assume the official histories of each other. But at least in that instance, none of the heritage which Joe Hawkins has been talking about, even for the regions, which is still relatively young, it's only the last sort of 20 odd years, really. But none of that heritage, as you say, the Pro 14 victory, Challenge Cup victories, Celtic Cup victories, none of that's lost, on paper at least.
Do you think would it be absolutely ridiculous to suggest to sort of just start afresh?
It's interesting. Let's not forget David Moffat, the new man who's going to be managing the relationship between the Scarlets and or is it New Luxury Comforts or something like that? The US company.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he's going to be managing the relationship between that. Let's not forget, he's the man who brought regionalism to Wales in the first place. So if he's got any sort of input, things could get really spicy, because essentially what he's now looking at is the dismantling of his brainchild. But the issue you raise with a fresh start is that everybody wants a fresh start, as you say, and that's all wonderful, but everybody wants to be a part of that fresh start. Now, if the WRU is going to come knocking on your door and say, we've got this great fresh start, it's the radical change you've all been calling for, but you're not going to be a part of it, your neighbours are, how is that going to make you feel as a Welsh rugby fan? And I think that's the ultimate aim of, that's probably how you'd sum up the emotions of Welsh people at the moment. They all want to come along on the ride, and there's uproar that 2 of these teams, with, fairly decent histories, are going to be left behind.
Yeah. Well, we'll see what happens, Tom. We've certainly gone deep into that debate, but there'll be information coming out all the time on this. But we'll move back to the game on the pitch. Obviously we haven't chatted too much about this sort of Welsh rugby over the last couple of months, with the Lions series with Jack Morgan and Thomas Williams before he got injured representing the Lions, and obviously the Welsh ending their losing streak. in Japan. Starting with the Japan series, how did you sort of feel that sort of went for Wales on the pitch?
Yeah, well, we got that win in Japan, which I think would have been a relief to many. I do fear it's going to be crashing back down to reality come the autumn, even if we are sort of building that fresh start with Steve Tandy at the helm. Matt Sherratt, I don't think was ever going to have the job permanently. He had just signed a new long-term contract with Cardiff when he initially took the interim job with Wales, so it would have seemed a bit daft. Would the WRU have had to buy out themselves if they were to appoint Matt Sherratt as the head coach at Wales, which seemed really daft. But he did bring that win over the line, so he can leave with his head held high and leave on a nice note. As for the Japan series, it's not that long ago we would have been looking at and saying it should be 3-0. And let's face it, the victory that Wales did get in that series was really scrappy. Sort of only just got over the line. It wasn't a performance for the ages. So I really don't think we should get carried away with that. With a nod to the future, it is really exciting to perhaps have some of the old guard back in the Wales squad. Jake Ball is back playing in Wales. There's talk that he could be coming into the fold, not necessarily as a starter, but somebody with that experience in the dressing room. Liam Williams back as well. So that's
Your
something.
Lions back as well. Jack
Yes,
Morgan is on
yeah, of course.
Williams.
Jack Morgan,
What do you
Tomos
think
Williams.
that's going to do for Welsh, especially Jack Morgan having such a key impact on the Lions series as he did?
Yeah, it's only helped. He got a player of the match at one point, didn't he, as well? I think. So he had a real impact there. One of the better players on the tour, I feel. Tomos Williams as well. His impact doesn't go understated. His injury would have been gutting to see, but from what we saw of him on that tour, he was, really bold as he always is. He's innovative. He's that bright spark on the pitch. He's not a sort of conservative type of player. He's always looking for ways to get forward and get points on the board from the breakdown, get the ball out of the set piece and into open play quickly, and that's what makes him so fluid. So he's really, really, they'll all be really good assets to have back in the team. Haven't mentioned Louis Rees-Zammits yet either, who I'm sure will be considered by Steve Tandy. Nobody's really seen him play rugby union for 2-3 years now, after he tried to crack the NFL. So I think it depends really what version of him comes out at Bristol. But that again could be another breath of fresh air in that squad for a lot of players. Louis Rees-Zammits is going to be walking into a very different squad to the one he left. So it could be a breath of fresh air to those players, but also an environment he's not used to. It could be like starting all over again for him, So I wouldn't sort of assume that he's going to come in and score 4 or 5 tries over the course of that autumn campaign and be the player we're missing, and all of a sudden we'll be taking it to the likes of South Africa and Australia again. But his presence alone is going to be a breath of fresh air, as will the other guys coming back in. So that's going to be a real boost to Steve Tandy. He himself is a man who knows the game in Wales inside out. But yeah, overall, in theory, these are all positive things as well, but they can go the other way.
Well, that's an awful lot of factors you brought into the mix there. A lot to unpack there. Louis Rees-Zammits, what do you make of that whole situation? When he's come out of the NFL a couple of weeks ago, he's sort of said recently he sort of felt like he was wasting his talents there. He wasn't getting enough practice time, and he wanted to come back and sort of help out with his country and for Wales again.
Yeah,
Was motivation for him. How do you think he's going to get on at Bristol Bears, and how much of an impact can he bring to
it's a
national?
move. It's a move that perhaps makes more sense now that the WRU have come out with this 2-region statement. It would be really up in the air as to where he's going to play. If any of them, it was going to be Cardiff. He's publicly said he's actually living in Cardiff and commuting over to Bristol, so he's house hunting here, and not over the border. So he is going to be living in Wales and close to family. So
It's
it would have made
like an
sense,
interview.
but for one reason or another, a move to Cardiff or a Welsh region hasn't materialised. So he's gone back to the Premiership. It's Bristol, not Gloucester. So it's the other West Country rival this time. Um, and I mean, I think he ended up at Gloucester due to through his links with Hartpury, didn't he? Um, it seems he's at Bristol this time mainly because it's close enough to Cardiff for him to be able to commute back and forth, and he can stay close to family.
I think it's also in terms
Whilst
of
also remaining competitive.
yeah, I think it's that you speak about the competitive nature of Bristol have been Bristol and Gloucester have been a fairly similar position last year in the Premiership. I think it's the way they play Bristol. It's like, I mean, you've
Well,
seen
yeah,
them in
Pat
the last
Lam's got them playing
final.
some really good rugby. really good rugby. He was in the frame for the Wales job.
Well, it's really open and expansive game. They get the ball wide, they keep the ball moving. It's like really like they've got a couple of Fijians in there. It's a very exciting side to watch, and I think they use their wingers quite a lot as well. So he'll be getting involved in the game quite a bit. So I think it'll be quite interesting to see where he sort of sets up on that
Yeah,
side. But I think maybe also as well as the location that you're speaking of is a
yeah.
factor for him making that move.
On the field, it suits him. People forget he's also got 32 Wales caps as well, so he'd be above the 25 cap threshold. And actually, he still feels like such a young player, perhaps because, as I say, we haven't seen him since the World Cup. And he decides to go and crack the NFL and chase his dreams. And as supportive as the Welsh public were, I think they could breathe a sigh of relief to see him back. In terms of an answer on to whether he was ever going to crack the NFL, I know Dom tried to tackle this on an earlier podcast, and it's a really difficult question to answer because one or two have gone over and done it, but they're exceptions to the rule. It is a really physically demanding sport. And I think the technical abilities of American football and the physicality of that match a bigger ball carrier than that of Louis Rees-Zammits. You know, he's a winger. He's small. He's fast. He gets into places no other player can, and that's why he scores tries and why he's probably more suited to rugby than American football. And
Do you think there's anything he can
it's
bring from his experience in the NFL? I speculated about this last week.
yeah. I
Do you
think
think
he's
he
going
can
to
bring
be.
it?
I think he's going to be much better at examining how to get on the end of a set piece. If you're looking at lineups, especially, he's going to be watching where that ball's coming. How are you going to move that ball from there out wide quickly? Where's he going to position himself on the field as well? Because American football is so stop-start, you've got to know where to put yourself on the field and when, what position you need to be in to receive the ball. There's a lot of kicking, so could suit some playing styles. I know Steve Tandy was a fan of that when he was at the Ospreys. So yeah, if that's anything, I think he's going to be able to read the game a lot better than he did defensively, perhaps as well as physically. As at halfback, he'd be one of the last lines of defense at an American football field. I know Gatlin tried him at fullback a few times as well before he decides to go over in a little bit of a sort of experimental phase. He's going to come back, I think, with those skills honed. Perhaps a more well-rounded player as opposed to the raw natural talent that we saw beforehand.
That would be exactly what you want, Thomas, when them going into
Well,
the
yeah,
autumn
you,
national
you
series.
you wouldn't complain at all if he came onto the field and made that sort of contribution, even if he didn't score a try, perhaps an assist, made a few game-saving tackles, um, won a set piece here or there, or played a commanding role in the build-up to a score. I'd like to put it this way: I'd like him to come back a more rounded, bit more of a team player than he was before, if anything. But that would really, I think, be my only criticism of him. People draw comparisons to Gavin Henson and him back in the day, of course, notorious perhaps for his spray tan and dashing looks. Tom Shanklin, I think, was the one who said um, that partnership between him and Gavin Henson at 13 was a complete contrast between no hair and having enough hair gel for the rest of Wales in the 12 jersey. But yeah, perhaps brings a bit of personality back to a side that has been a bit damp and lacking as well.
Yeah, well, he definitely brings that star quality, and you speak about Steve Tandy there as well and how he's going to use him. Steve Tandy, new Wales coach, in case anyone had missed it, and all the other news around Welsh Rugby. But Steve Tandy's your new Welsh Rugby national coach. He comes on after, as you say, spells from Ospreys, defence coach for Scotland for a number of years, and all their successes in the Six Nations and Autumn Series and the like of that. What do you think Steve brings to the Wales job?
Well, first off, it's a really good career move for him. I think it's the next step up he deserves. What does Steve bring to the Wales job? He knows that pretty much every game, every level of the game here inside out. He was head coach at Bridgend, went on to coach the Ospreys, did very well there, spent a long time there. Um, then went on to the defence role at the Scotland national team and been around that setup a long time. He's been on a Lions tour, let's not forget, and now assumes the head coach role once again with Wales probably in his hour of need. It's a nice touch that he is Welsh. But the fact that he knows the game, I suppose, if you're looking for a guy who knows how to do relatively well on a budget, work with, we didn't know at the time at the time of his appointment, but work with two professional teams, has a great knowledge of international rugby, um, is excellent at building up a rapport with players, um, and ultimately understands the role of a backroom coach as well as the head coach role. You've got your man. Um, I think the reaction over here wasn't really amazing. It was, oh, okay, let's see how it goes. It wasn't, it wasn't terrible. It was, oh, this is rubbish. There's a lot of one or two may have said it was quite underwhelming, but really that's where we are at Welsh Rugby, and that's no disrespect to Steve Tandy. But I think we're looking for somebody to come in and, dare I say, make do with what we've got and try and get something out of it. And he's a man I put money on doing a decent job. Nothing spectacular. If you're looking to get out of the groups at the World Cup and a fourth, third, maybe even second place finish at the Six Nations, for the next couple of seasons at least, then he's your man.
So you think it's more of a steady appointment rather than one that's you're gonna build and build and build, and then one in a cup and two probably not one world. That's two
Yeah,
World Cups.
yeah. Perhaps he's the man.
In the next World Cup, he's not. You don't think he's the man to take them that far. You just think he's a steady.
Listen, let's see how things go. If Wales end up miraculously winning a Six Nations before the World Cup, then who knows what can happen. And even under Gatland at the last World Cup, we inflicted a record defeat on Australia. All right, they were under Eddie Jones, but by and large, those are the same players who've just inflicted a record defeat on the Springboks. And Wales, boring rugby, won against Fiji out there. So it was an all right World Cup, even in the midst of everything that was going on here. And with the professional game then. So if you look at it now, those problems have probably worsened. But actually, if Wales get out of the group at the next World Cup, I don't think there'd be too many complaints. If they won their round of 16 match, I think they've had a really good World Cup. But that's a couple of years down the line yet. If we're talking autumn, if we can win one of those matches, I think it's been a pretty good autumn. Six Nations is just to avoid the wooden spoon. I think that'll be the aim. If Steve Tandy can do those three things, I think he'll have been off to a great start.
Would you highlight, in terms of moving forward to those games with Steve, would you highlight the Fiji, not Fiji, would you highlight the Japan game again as one that you'd want to win, or you would sort of pick as one?
I think you'd be looking at that as like sort of that he'll be hammering home the fact that you've just beaten Japan in that team talk. I think the atmosphere could well be quite hostile towards Eddie Jones as well, and his men. I think that's really the angle you come from. Is like, you've done this once, you can do it twice. I think
Do you
that's
think
the angle a lot of
Argentina?
Welsh fans are coming from.
Do you think Argentina they've got like a outside shout?
Yeah, it would be an outside shot if any. Let's face it. Argentina come into that match as favourites. Of course
South
they.
Africa, New Zealand, I'll not even ask you. I don't know. I might be a bit stingy pulling off
Yeah,
an upset.
no, I don't. To be fair, I don't think we'll be aiming to win any of the others. Argentina would be a surprise victory. There's no reason you shouldn't be going into these matches and giving your all. But let's face it.
Absolutely.
But let's face it. That's if you come off on the end of a heavy defeat against the Springboks, or if Argentina put 30 points on you, it shouldn't be coming as a surprise now.
Mm. And what sort of things would you be looking at in those bigger games against South Africa and the All Blacks? Like what sort of parts of the performance would you just be looking for that fight, just making it a tough game, or what sort of are you looking for? More like or what sport are you looking for primarily in that?
I'd be looking at the fitness, to be honest, more than anything. If you can stay in it with these teams for 80 minutes, if you're making tackles when the clock's gone red, if you're forcing turnovers in the 79th minute, even at the end of the first half, just before you're about to go in for your orange, keep your mind off that and try and kick that drop goal or something. A little bit of desire in that sense would be nice, and the hunger to want to take it to these teams. I suppose you want the likes of the All Blacks and the Springboks, Australia to come off the pitch against you and say, "Fair play, boys, you gave us a good game there." Even if not on the scoreboard, if they come off and say, "Yeah, enjoyed that." Um, if Welsh fans come out and are pleased with what they saw, ultimately, I think Welsh fans need to be entertained as well. Play some entertaining rugby. Don't just sit, 10 foot deep, especially under Gatland. Not so much under Sherratt, but the defence was quite porous, admittedly. But under Gatland, if Wales had sat any deeper, they'd have been in the Arms Park. So I think
Hmm.
you've got to do something in those games that is going to win over the Welsh fans. And as always, as we saw against Ireland in that first half in the Six Nations this year, um, again, nobody really expected Wales to win, but one that Ireland only just came out of with a victory. Just show some hunger, show some desire, show some flair, try things, be brave. That's always going to win the Welsh crowd over. They're going to love that, and it's going to wow them. And if you give the Welsh fans a show, they're really going to repay you for it. And that, I think, is what's made the Principality such a fortress in previous years and what's been lacking.
So it's all about bringing that entertainment, that desire. Do you think Steve can win? What would be your prediction for that autumn series?
Yeah,
What how
he
Steve's gonna
can
get?
he can definitely win the hearts and minds of Welsh people. He's already done it on a smaller scale with the Ospreys and Bridgend, let's not forget. Um, if he knows how to win over Welsh people, I'd be surprised. Well, I'd be surprised if he doesn't from his time in Welsh rugby, quite frankly. And being Welsh himself, he'll put himself in the shoes of a fan and kind of know what he'd want in that position and try and instill that into the players, and hopefully it translates on the pitch. So then, I don't think Welsh fans are going to be looking for results instantly. As you say, a win against Japan again might be nice. And we certainly can't be going 18 games without a victory again. I don't think we'll be wanting a wooden spoon again. Um, but certainly, I think improvement is the bottom line. I think a lot of Welsh fans are sat here sort of every time, they say it can't get worse than this, can it? It can't get worse than this. And every time it seemingly does. We were sat there after the Six Nations. Oh, it can't get worse than this. And then it sort of did.
The desire not to say, not to, not to repeat Mick McCarthy's infamous words there.
Yeah, it's what
It
he was a Cardiff
can.
City manager. He would know, wouldn't he? But
Uh,
yeah, but yeah, and then it kind of did. It got to the summer series, and we finally got that win, but it was so scrappy. Then Matt Sherratt wasn't staying on, um, and sort of been a little bit of a roller coaster during that period because it was announced Louis Rees-Zammits was coming back. Great, amazing, fantastic. The Ospreys and the Scarlets were on the up, but then Cardiff went into administration, and suddenly things got worse again. And now people are announcing this. Let's face it, if this didn't have to be done in the eyes of the WRU, I don't think they'd have taken this action. So I think things have taken a turn for the worse again. And it's just another twist, really, in the tale of Welsh rugby because we're almost immune to, we almost expect something else to come down the tracks at this point. But I would love Steve Tandy to be the man who can finally prove Welsh fans right when they say it can't get worse than this.
do you think he can galvanize? You speak about him being a real people person. Do you think that's a key thing he's going to galvanize? Do you think he's almost going to play on the emotion of what's going on in the background and sort of say, boys, you're this country's hope right now. I know it's been
Yeah.
really horrible even in this side for the last 18 months, but you've got an opportunity to create a bit of light. Do you think is that the message he's going to be reinforcing to those boys?
Yeah, I think that's certainly what he's going to be reinforcing in the dressing room. I think if he is going to galvanize them as well, though, I think the media comes into it to some extent. Not necessarily talking to us, but certainly,
Well, you never know.
if I was going to say anything about him, he has been awfully quiet at the moment. I'm not sure whether the WIU have kind of said, "Look, we've got some stuff to get out of the way first. Can you take a back seat?" Obviously, he's done one interview publicly with the WIU on their socials. I'd love him to sort of come out and say, "These are my plans. This is what I want to see. These are the people I want to involve." He said he'll then consider Louis Rees-Zammits. But the more we see of a head coach, I think in the media, out in public, not really sort of turning away. And that's one thing Warren Gatland was really good at. He was always very accessible. And he was always, pretty commonplace in the media. and out on the street. If we can see Steve Tandy in that ilk, and he can sort of almost prove, well, not only to the players I'm one of you, but to supporters and Welsh people, I'm one of you and you're one of us, then that will go a long way into that galvanizing process and getting people on side.
And do you think that's something he's going to have to work on more as someone that's
Um,
stepped into the
it's
national
it's
team?
strange. I mean, he's done it before, yes, in a head coach role. But it's been a while since he has done that head coach, and it's a different world since then. He's very quietly gone about his business at Scotland and done a really good job of it. Um, Sort of wasn't really one of the main coaches on the Lions tour that he did, but very quietly went about his business and did very, very well there. So his ability is undoubted. So yeah, perhaps communication could be something that he just looks to brush up on before he comes out, or again tries to take on a little bit more of. Perhaps it'll take some getting adjusting to again. Look, you're the head coach now. The buck stops with you, and the added pressure of that being a national team. He's never coached a national team before. But if there was any team you'd want to coach, it would be Wales.
Well, that's it. That's it. Just to finish off, your Steve Tandy's unofficial spokesperson, assistant, whatever. Could you give us a little a message for Welsh rugby in this time of turmoil and uncertainty? A message of hope for Welsh rugby.
I'll go one better than that. I'll give you a message I was actually told, and it was sat in a room with the late great Eddie Butler, and he said, "Look back through history. Welsh rugby has had its highs, and it's had its lows. And when it's low, my God, does it feel low? But when it's high, it's the best thing in the world." And that is what I would go with. Is that I think, as I said before, really, it only gets better. And he's got to position himself as that man who delivers on that promise. It's a promise that the WRU and successive coaches have made for so long. Perhaps maybe other than Wayne Pivak, because he was an incumbent at the time of a very successful era in Welsh rugby. But yeah, I think he's got to be the man now who comes in and says, okay, the rot stops here. The only way is up. It's not going to be pretty, but almost going back to that point of everybody wants to come on the journey. That's what the national team can do. I think that certainly this regional development that's going on at the moment really can't, in the sense that this is the journey we're going on and you're coming with us. Come on. And he can say that to everybody. Because as much as rugby is a very tribal thing here in Wales, I think that everybody enjoys getting behind the national team. Everybody looks forward to the Six Nations, the Autumn Internationals, the World Cup. And, whether you're a rugby lover, whether you're on the terraces at Sardis Road or something every weekend, or whether you turn up at the Principality for one Six Nations game a year, if you can appeal to all of those people and bring them along with you, you won't go far wrong.
That's a pretty good message to finish off of, and I'm glad you've referenced Eddie Butler there. I think he's one of rugby's greatest commentators. I think we can all agree. Well, thanks very much for coming on, Tom. It's been an absolute pleasure to hear your insight. I mean, it's something that I'm far more insight than I could ever give, really. Just the detail that you went into. It's really appreciated, and it's always great to hear from you. Always great to hear your thoughts. And it was a very interesting discussion. So thanks very much for coming on, Tom. And that was episode 7 of the Rock and Roll Show, season 3. Thank you very much for watching.